Hi, this is Jeff Pitts, pastor of the Collective Church in Cleveland, Tennessee. We hope this message helps you to live on purpose for His purposes. Now here's the message.
I shared with one of my darling children that I would be speaking about Esther, and their response was, "Oh my gosh, Mom, how cliche." I thought, y'all are just great. That, I speak, and it's going to be on a woman in the Bible. But it really has something to do with Esther's femininity. We'll start there. But Esther chapter 4, I'm going to kind of skip around through this first part of the chapter. Verse 1, when Mordecai learned of all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. Then go to verse 6. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay to the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. Then skip to verse 9. Hathach went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said. So if you can't get the picture here, Hathach's like the go-between. They didn't have text messaging. So Hathach is going back and forth, back and forth. Then she instructed him to say to Mordecai, all the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that they be put to death unless the king extends the golden scepter to them and spares their lives. But 30 days have passed since I've been called to the king. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent in this time, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews, and it will rise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this? Then Esther sent this to Mordecai, go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. And when this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. So let's pray. Lord, I ask that you would just be with us. I know that you are present. Help us to hear what you have to say through your word. May you soften our hearts to that and open our ears. In Jesus' name. So there are 3 parts that I want to focus on. It's the call, the guide, and the obedience. If you're not familiar with the story of Esther, she is a young Jewish girl. She's orphaned. Mordecai is her uncle cousin, sort of how that kind of worked weirdly, but he was older, so she kind of called him Uncle Mordecai, but he was really more of a cousin in relation. So that's one story that's happening. Jews are in captivity in Persia. We have King Xerxes. He gets mad at his wife, Vashti, because she doesn't want to come to him because he has a bunch of drunk men, and she says, no, I'm good. And he says, that's cool, you're out. So he kicks her out. She's no longer his wife. And so Xerxes goes on this, I don't know, it's like The Bachelor. You guys know I like The Bachelor. So it becomes like The Bachelor. Or if you've watched the VeggieTales version, it's like a beauty contest where they're trying to choose who the new one is. So it's very much like that. They gather Esther, don't really know she's a Jew. They kind of kidnap her almost, which is kind of creepy to think about. But she gets in there and she wins. And she becomes queen. Okay, that's the first 3 chapters of what's happened. But what we find out is that Haman, second in command, hates the Jews. And he really hates Mordecai because Mordecai makes him look bad on a regular basis. So Haman's put out this plot. So Mordecai is like, listen, they're going to kill us all. They're going to kill all of our family, all of the people in our community. You've been put in this position. Now use it. So Esther's like, yeah, but see, it's more complicated than that. So there's a call to action. She's been positioned to help, right? She is in this position. And he says, listen, the whole population is going to be destroyed. And Esther's like, yeah, I know, but I can't go to the king. I can't go to the king. I can't put myself in that position because the lady before me got killed when she did something against what the king wanted. Now, I don't want you to think that Esther is like flippant here, okay? She's not like, yeah, I don't care if anybody else dies. That's not what she's doing. She's really just about saving herself, which we all would be, so don't lie. And she's like, I really can't do anything. It's almost like if I go, it's like this self-sacrifice, and it's not going to do any good anyways, right? She knows the risk, right? She was afraid. She was afraid of what helping the Jews and the people in Susa, her family, would mean for her. All she could think about was the consequence of saying yes to that. That it was going to kill her, and it was going to do bad things. At the very least, she would be banished. Like she would be killed, would be banished. So, unfortunately for you guys tonight, I don't have a lot of stories to go with this. Normally I like to be really like a good storyteller. I have a few things. But I have some questions for you. Are you afraid of the call that God's put on your life? Does it like scare you? Does it seem bigger than you? Is it something that you go, there's no way it will ever happen because? And you've got all these lists of things of your reasons. Similar to how Esther felt, right? She was afraid of what she was being asked to do, what the call was, the call to action. Are you afraid to join with the people of God, to be used by God, to deliver a message for God? That's the call on Esther, right? That's really the call on all of us. Obeying the call may not be a part of your 5-year plan. It may not be super clear. It may be a little fuzzy. It may seem impossible, and the easier option may be like Esther says. You don't know. Because I bet if I sat down with any of you and I pushed on this, you all would look at me and go, but you don't know. You don't really understand what God's called me to do. You don't really understand the barriers are there. You really don't understand. And Esther's not responding to Mordecai disrespectfully. She's saying, listen, you ought to know. You heard Vashti got kicked out? Like, you ought to know. Why would you put me in this position? Verse 11, we're going to go back and look at one more time. She says, all the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned has but one law, that they be put to death unless the king extends his golden scepter. Excuses, right? She's like, you ought to know this, Mordecai. Why are you asking me to do this? The only way that this works, that Mordecai's plan for her to approach the king works, is if the king extends his scepter and accepts her. There are things that we, the collectives, have been called to. There are things that we, you guys, are being called to, have been called to, that seem like there's one exception. And you're not even sure what that exception may be, that it could work. Like, it's never going to work, it's not going to work, it's a terrible idea, except for this one thing, right? There's this one thing that maybe would allow it to work, and that's what she tells Mordecai. She said, the only way I don't die is if that one thing happens. Don't be so afraid of what God has for you and what he's called you to that you come up with a list of excuses. So, number 2, we have a guide, right? Mordecai is Esther's guide. Unfortunately, for those of us who are cowardly, God will send a guide. Someone to kind of kick you along the way. I mean, encourage you along the way, right? Encourage you, kick you, same thing. Somebody who's going to encourage you along the way, who's going to say things that will be encouraging to keep you going, right? Mordecai is her guide. I had a guide. I've had a couple guides in my life. A lot of you know one of my guides. His birthday is today. Dear Dr. William Lamb, who those of you who knows Dr. Lamb, it's really just William. He had served as a guide at different points in my life. There was a time that I was at a different position school-wise in my career, and I had employed his help on some things, so he would come by my office sort of semi-regularly, and I had moved into, partially into this position. And I would say, William, I've got all the responsibility, I've got all of the work, and I don't have the pay, and I don't have the title. And he'd go, yeah, keep doing it. Awesome, William. I've got all of the work, I've got all of the responsibility. What am I doing here? This is ridiculous. I went to school to be a school administrator. I didn't come to just do this part where I don't even get paid more and I do all of the work. And he said, you don't have to have a title to lead. I said, oh, okay. But still, William, just like Esther, but did you hear what I said? I'm not getting any of the things that come with what I want to do. And you don't have to have a title to lead. Lead where you are, and everything else will come. I hate to tell you he was right. I don't like to admit when William's right. But he was right. Within just maybe 3 or 4 months, all of those pieces clicked into place. I got a pay raise. I got the title. I got all of the things. And it was because I had been faithful to serve even without the title. I had been faithful to lead even without the title. Just like William wouldn't let me off the hook, Mordecai doesn't let Esther off the hook. He pushes her and he pushes her into not only considering the consequences of accepting the call, but the consequences of refusing. So back to verse 12 and 13. When Esther's words were reported, he sent back this answer. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance of the Jews, or for the Jews, will arise from another place. God doesn't need you. His will, his purposes will always come to fruition. He doesn't need you, but you miss out. Just like Mordecai says to Esther, he goes, yeah, that's fine. Go ahead, but don't think you're going to be the lone saved one here. And don't think deliverance won't come, because deliverance will come. You just don't get to be a part of the process. Help will arise from another place. Help will arise from another place. You aren't the only option. You aren't it. God's will, God's purposes will be carried out whether you decide to participate or not, whatever you feel the Lord's calling to you. If you think it's scary, okay, we'll get over that. If it's a matter of life and death, okay. But you're going to miss out. Have any of you ever had FOMO, the fear of missing out? It's an actual definition now. I had no idea. It's in the dictionary. It's in the Merriam-Webster dictionary. This is the definition. It says, the fear of not being included in something that others are experiencing, usually an interesting or enjoyable activity. And typically it's things that happen on social media. So Jeff and I will talk about this often as we make fun of our children. And the fact that I did not have FOMO when I was a teenager. Do you know why I didn't have it? Because I didn't know what was going on. Like, I had no concept of what actually was happening when I wasn't there because there was no way to know. So when I left school on Friday and I went and hung out with whoever I went and hung out with, and then I hung out with whoever on Saturday, only way I would know that somebody hung out without me was if somebody called me and told me, or I heard about it at school on Monday or at the mall on Saturday. I didn't sit in my bed and watch what everybody else was doing, right? I couldn't. I didn't care. I still don't care. I racked my brain for a FOMO experience, and it's only been like famous people things. Like I got an old Facebook status. I go back and look at my memories because they're funny, because it's typically pictures of my kids and they're little. It makes me all tenderhearted to remind me I love them. I do love you guys. But I'll look at them, and then sometimes my statuses crack me up. First of all, it's like I'm so old that mine will sometimes say, "Is cooking dinner?" Because in 2010, that was great. Like, I wanted to update the world that I was making tacos for dinner. But there was a few weeks ago, I looked at one, and of course it's in the middle of Bachelor season, and so it said, I think I want to be on The Bachelor, not because of the guy, but just for the vacations. Like, that's the only reason. Like, so I can go on the vacations. Like, those are the things that I miss out on. But Jeff tells this story, because we try to have sort of sometimes a why not attitude in life, and so he tells this story, so I'm going to steal his story for you. The year is 1995, somewhere north of Chicago. I'm just going to go with that. It's better. Somewhere north of Chicago. It's 1995. Jeff hears about a concert that he wants to attend. Some of you may know the lead singer as the wagon wheel guy, Darius Rucker. The rest of us know him as Hootie and the Blowfish. So Jeff decides, after he heard the advertisement on the radio, they were going to be, hold on, I have it written down. At the theater. What's the theater? Oh, the Ravinia Amphitheater in Chicago. So Jeff hears about this, and he's like, I'm going to go to the concert. So the only way you could buy tickets was at Ticketmaster. Ticketmaster was at Sears department store in the mall. So Jeff drives his little car, goes to the mall, gets in line to buy tickets to see Hootie and the Blowfish. And then he walks away. Have you ever seen Hootie and the Blowfish in concert? He missed out. He missed out because of fear, because in the moment, the tickets seemed expensive. They weren't. They seemed expensive. And at that moment, he's standing in line and he goes, oh gosh, I'm not really sure who would go with me. As if anybody turns down Hootie and the Blowfish tickets in 1995. He could have stood in like the middle of the Ped Mall and been like, I have tickets. And anybody would have gone with him. But there was this fear associated there of being alone, of being out of money, and he got out of line and never bought the tickets. He's never seen Hootie in concert. Oftentimes, your guide is going to tell you, don't get out of line. Don't get out of line. Stay in line, buy the tickets to Africa or China or India or any of those places, wherever it is, because the call is bigger than you, it's bigger than anybody else, and the guide will say, don't get out of line. Stay in line. Stay with it. Verse 14 says this. For if you remain silent, relief and deliverance will come from somewhere else. In the Hebrew, yeah, I went there. The Hebrew word for silent means conceal, hidden. Mordecai, the guide, was saying to Esther, if you stay hidden from this call, God's going to use somebody else. If you keep hiding from the call of God, he's going to use somebody else to conceal, to hide, to shelter away. Sometimes we find false shelter in our fears. Sometimes fear can look like a really cozy blanket, and we wrap ourselves up and we just stay. And we hide away from the rest of the world because we're afraid. Because we conceal ourselves in this false shelter of what really maybe could kind of sort of not happen. So I want to say this out of love, because I have served as a guide for some of you, the one who kicks you down the road. I've kicked some of you all the way to Columbia. I'm kidding. Sorry, I had to pick on her. So just saying, I've kicked some of you all the way out. No. But I need you guys to stop acting like you don't know what God's called you to do. You know. But one thing I also need you to understand is God is not Waze. Do you guys have that app, the Waze app? It literally tells you every little thing that you may encounter between here and your destination. And what you want from God is for him to be Waze. You want him to say, you can take a stop here, and you can take a stop there. There's traffic here. There's an accident here. You're going to need to make this detour, and you're going to need to do this. And God goes, I'm not Waze. I maybe will give you the first step. Because what's a life of faith if you know the whole journey? It's not. That's not faith if you know the whole journey. It's not faith if you can look at the map and go, oh, good. Okay, so from 6 years from now, I'm going to have a child, but they're going to end up in the NICU, and we're going to spend 6 weeks there because of this. And then in 10 years later, they're going to go through, I'm going to have to go and bail that one out of jail, and I'm going to go do this. It hasn't happened yet. But we want that, right? We want this like map to go, give me every step, every turn, just so I know. So you're going to come and you're going to pray for clarity, that the Lord will make your calling clear. And I think he's probably really annoyed with us. Oh my word, just do what I told you to do. What does that mean for you? I don't know. It may mean finishing a degree. It may mean taking a new job. It may do 1,000 things it can mean, but you know what God has called you to do. So act like it. Because confidence is not from what I feel. Confidence comes from the Lord. You've been called because there are things that your heart burns for. There are things that you have that whenever it's mentioned, you just can't not talk about it. Those are the callings. Those are the things God's called you to. God is saying to you, I've got it. You know the first step, so let's go. Like I, in my life, am personally tired of sitting and waiting on what I think maybe the door kind of sort of open should be. I don't really know. Like, I just don't want to do that. I know where God has put me in this season. I know where God has positioned us. I know that there are days that we could just say, yeah, no. But I also know that would be disobedience. Because what some of you may not know is that when you talk about passion and calling, this is what Jeff and I are passionate and called to. Even on nights where it's just the faithful. Thank you guys for coming. But I don't have any doubt. So we're going to go after it full force because that's what God's called us to do. And we undoubtedly already have. Tripped, messed up, sidestepped, didn't see that obstacle coming, didn't see that betrayal coming, didn't understand what was happening there. Okay. Because anything we do is worthwhile if it's to advance the kingdom. So the last thing is obedience. So she finally gets it together, and she goes, okay, fine. Y'all fast with me, and I'm going to go to the king, and if I die, I die. Like, oh well. Like, I think she may have been a little dramatic. I mean, I say that, but yeah, she had evidence to be, right? Vashti was killed. I wanted to point something out. It has nothing to do with the message, but I wanted to point out a fun fact for you theologians in the room. Esther does not call a fast in order to hear from God. Esther calls a fast to prepare herself for obedience. She knew what to do. There was no seeking clarity. There was no trying to hear from the Lord, the vision. There was none of that. That was not why she fasted. She fasted, her whole staff fasted, and all of Susa fasted to prepare her spiritually to walk in and face the king. Some of y'all, some of us, may need to spend a little time fasting, not to hear, but to prepare. So, obedience. Obedience is the game changer. Her obedience saves the family. It saves Susa. It positions Mordecai. She becomes queen for a very long time. Good things happen. All the Bible people say we have divine turnaround. Okay? Anybody who preaches on Esther talks about divine turnaround, divine reversal. Because the gallows meant for Haman, meant for Mordecai, we hang Haman. Yes, I agree with all those things. Yes. But obedience is what brings reversal. Obedience is what brings that. Again, fun fact for those of you who don't know, God is never mentioned in this book. He's never in here. He's not mentioned. Only the Jewish people are. Esther had to decide to abandon her security and all the plans that she had and fully accept what God was asking of her. She had to come to the place that the risk of acceptance was less than the risk of decline. And she had to own that. So are you willing? That was what I called this message, by the way. Are you willing? Are you willing? Are you willing to say, I don't have the map. I don't know what's next. I don't know what's 10 steps from now. I don't know what's 3 years from now. But I know that this one step is closer to where I think God has called me, so I'm willing to risk and make this next step. Where does radical obedience come from? Because that's what this is, right? It's radical obedience, extreme obedience, which we should have. You cannot have obedience without trust. Esther trusted Mordecai, her guide, but Esther trusted her faith in God. Even though he's not mentioned, we know he's present. You cannot have this level of obedience for calling unless you trust God. 100% total and complete abandonment without reservation. We have to determine in our hearts, no matter what, if our worst nightmares come true, that he is still trustworthy. And for some of us, we have walked through our worst nightmares, but we still trust him. No matter what, we trust him. There is no greater victory, and then there's no greater blow to Satan than to fully trust in God. None. It's the best thing we can do. So, when you start to shift your life, your statements, to a no matter what, I'm going to obey no matter what, I'm going to trust God no matter what, then your life will begin to change. So what will be the result of your obedience? I don't know. You guys can come on. But I do know that obedience is better than sacrifice. So don't tell me how many things that you've done or given up or whatever, or how religious you are and how many times you pray and how many times you fast and how many times you do these things, because they are inconsequential if you are not obedient. Delayed obedience, disobedience. You can't wait on it. You can't say, oh, you know what, when things look different, I'll then follow what God has for me. He's going to use somebody else. He's going to use somebody else because he's looking for people who are willing and who trust in him to be obedient, to step forward.
Thanks for listening to our podcast. And remember to rate, review, and subscribe. Now go be the collectives.